Okay, good morning, class. Let's continue with our class on research methods. So yesterday we talked about measurement, right? Under the heading of operationalization. So we said that operationalization essentially making up a plan of how to perform a study. And a very important part of the plan is to measure the concept or measure the variable that we're interested in. And by measurement, we mean the process or the activity of assigning values to a particular concept. And we said that there are four types of measurements, right? There are nominal measures, ordinal measures, interval measures, and ratio measures. And each type of measure has its own property, right, providing unique information. And we know from the last few slides of yesterday's lecture that, each type of measurement builds on the previous one, right? So we start with nominal, and an ordinal builds on nominal by adding the ranking property, and the interval adds to the ordinal measure by adding the equal interval property, and then the ratio measure adds to interval measures by adding a real zero. Okay? All right, so as we also said yesterday, when you think of the measures, the four type measures, you can essentially think of them as four different types of rulers, right? If a person asks you, hey, how do you measure the length of a disk, you say, well, we apply a ruler to it. By the same, similarly, right? When a person asks you, how do we measure, how do we know that, this person is aggressive or not? You say, well, then let's, use a measure or a scale of aggressiveness and use the scale to index the aggressiveness of this person. Okay? But then there's a problem. The problem actually is universal, meaning as long as we're still talking about measurement, this problem will persist. And the problem is how reliable and how valid our measurements are. Okay, well, as you see, in fact, these are two problems, but we can sort of summarize them as one problem because this problem essentially concerns the quality of our measurements. And then the quality has two aspects, at least two aspects. The first aspect is, well, one aspect is reliability and the other is validity, right? So these two aspects of the quality of measurements will be the focus of today's lecture and the lecture tomorrow. Okay, so today we'll be talking about validity, and tomorrow we'll be talking about reliability before taking the exam. Okay? All right, so this is what we just said, right? A very important feature of performing scientific research is to carefully and systematically observe the physical or social world, right? And in a sense, to observe is equal to measure. So as we said, right, and a very important question that we should always keep in mind whenever we're measuring something, measuring a psychological property, for example, we should always ask ourselves, is this measurement good? Okay, for some reason, reliability pops up first, so no problem. Reliability and then validity are the two aspects, right? two of the many potential aspects of the quality of a measurement. And validity, right? Now we're defining the two aspects of quality. And validity means whether or not we're measuring what we intend to measure. So for example, I intend to measure a person's aggressiveness, but then the question I should ask myself is, by using this particular scale, am I really measuring this person's aggressiveness, but not measuring this person's, for example, extroversion? Okay. Um, so that's validity, and the question or the concern with regard to reliability is whether or not we are measuring the same thing um, across time, across situation, across people, etc. Right? Are we, in other words, measuring something consistently? Okay. So later on, you will see that these two aspects of quality are not independent of each other. Rather, they're connected in a very interesting way. And later on, we shall discuss about that, probably in our next lecture. Okay, validity. So I would like to think of the problem of validity as throwing darts on a dartboard. Okay, so this is a target. And then, we can think, or we can sort of imagine this, target as a variable, or to think a variable as a target. And our job is to hit the center of this target. So let's specify the rule, right? So if I throw a dart and this dart, lands at the center of this target, then I have a good measurement of the variable. Okay? So, right, exactly this is what I said, right? So if I can hit the center of this target, I will be having a valid um, measure of this variable. But then, if we follow the same reasoning, if my dart lands on the peripheral of this target rather than on the center, then this particular measure will be of the target, right? That means that this measurement activity fails. It does not provide a valid measure of our intended variable. We're not measuring what we intend to measure. Okay, so this is what we mean by the validity of measurement. So the validity of measurement is very important because, and is almost always concerned because construct, as we said before, right? Concepts invented for doing science is not directly observable 90% of the time, right? For example, if ask people, well, how do we see natural selection? Well, chances are you cannot see natural selection. You cannot directly see it. You cannot hear it. You cannot sense it. You cannot smell it. You can only infer, right? You can only infer the existence of natural selection based on your observation, based on some kind of measurement, right? So, and whenever we have measurement, there's always a chance that we make mistakes, we make errors, right? Sometimes errors are, I would say most of the time, errors are inevitable. Well, that's a point that we'll revisit later on. But let's sort of focus on here. And the point is, validity is almost always concerned because we cannot directly observe a construct. If most of a construct is like something as concrete as a table or a desk, then we will not be concerned because when you see an object in front of you shaped like a desk, you would say this is a desk, and 99% of the time you'll be correct, right? So in that case, validity would not be a concern because you are talking about what you intend to talk about. But that's not the case with constructs, right? Scientific concepts. Okay, so now you have a scale, a measurement. It can be a nominal scale, an interval scale, an ordinal scale. A ratio scale doesn't matter, right? But we know that, a scale is a tool. It's a tool that will allow us to measure, to index, to gain some knowledge about the construct, right? So it's a tool. So we apply this tool, which is a human invention, right? It is invented by scientists, right? So we then we apply this tool as we will, with a ruler, right? Apply a ruler to the edge of a desk. We apply the scale to a particular scientific concept, and we ask ourselves, well, is there a good match? Is there a good match between our scale and the construct that we intend to measure? Okay, if there's a good match, then we say our measurement, the scale is of good validity, is valid. If not, then we don't have a valid, then the scale is not valid, and we don't have a valid observation as a result. So it turns out that we have different types of validity, right? A measure can be valid or invalid in different senses, and we'll discuss them in turn. So the first type of validity is phase validity, and then we have content validity, and we have predictive validity, right? We'll go through them one by one. So phase validity asks a very simple question. That is, well, on the face of it, I'll just read it verbatim, right? Does this item, validly a typo here. Does an item validly measure a variable? Okay. In other words, to judge whether a scale or a measure is phase valid, much of the time we rely on our common sense, our gut feeling, right? Or the agreement that we have among a group of people, right? In science, we call it, we rely on the agreement, from a scientific community, right? This group of people sharing some kind of beliefs about the social world, and they agree upon, what is a good way to measure the concepts or constructs they are interested in. Okay? Right, so for example, let's say, we want to measure a person's aggressiveness or aggression. So what will be a face valid question or scale that we can use to measure a person's aggressiveness? Okay. Follow intuition, right? What does intuition tells you? What kind of question can you ask to index a person's, to measure a person's, or to know about a person's aggressiveness? Okay, I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. 1 and 2. Okay, how about the question of how aggressive are you? Right, this is a very simple question, but surprisingly or not surprisingly, researchers around the world use this question to measure their respondents' aggressiveness, which I think it's a good idea, because why not? If you want to know how aggressive a person is, there's no better way than directly ask the person, right? How aggressive are you, right? So we say that based on our understanding of English, based on, our understanding of the content, or, the meaning of this question, we say that, yeah, we agree that this question makes sense, makes a lot of sense in terms of, asking a person's aggressiveness. So we'll say that this measure is face valid. So to graphically represent this reasoning process, right? So we have this construct, aggressiveness. And then we said that we have a question or scale, a measure that we use to measure this construct. And then we say, we think or we agree that there's a good match between this question and the construct that we're interested in. So at least on the face of it. So there we go. We have good face validity. Okay? Very simple idea, right? Whether or not on the face of it, by the literal meaning of a word, for example, do we agree that this a particular question or a scale measures the construct that we're interested in? Okay, now let's talk about a second type of validity, and that's content validity. So the reason that we need content validity beyond face validity is because in many cases, right, a concept or a scientific construct has more than one dimensions. So in many cases, a scientific concept is more complicated than a unidimension or one dimension concept such as table, right? Table is table. They're that's what we mean. It's a table. It doesn't mean anything else, right? There are no layered meaning to this particular concept. So for this kind of concept, we don't have concern with its content validity. We simply ask, is this a table? If it's not, then it's not. If yes, then it's yes. There are no other possibilities, right? 99% of the time. But then, as we see in a few seconds, um, in many cases, especially in social science, a construct has multiple dimensions, many indicators, so to speak, that would indicate some related but different aspects of the same concept. Okay, so then contability asks the question whether a scale or measure covers all the known dimensions, all the known aspects of a concept. Okay, if it does, then the scale will have good contability. If it doesn't, then we don't have a good contability for the scale. So let's look at an example. Aggression. So let's stick with this concept or construct. So if we really think about it, and scientists do realize that aggression is a multi-dimensional construct. First of all, we have direct aggression, which is just another word for physical, aggression. So physical fights, you know, when you push people, when you hit people, when slap other people on their face, for example, right? We're talking about being directly aggressive against someone. So that's direct aggression. Not surprisingly, we also have indirect aggression. And this is also a very common type of aggression that scientists observe in social interactions. So a common example or typical example of indirect aggression is spreading malicious rumors, right? To backmouth people, to stab people behind their back, so to speak. Okay, so you're not fighting them face to face, rather you're sort of hurting them or damaging their reputation um, without their knowledge. That's also being aggressive. So that is an example of a concept that has two dimensions, right? And that creates a problem. Um, if, for the practice of asking one question to tap into this particular concept, because if you ask people, how aggressive are you? Right? Um, this person, Andrew, for example, would think, I do not fight with others. I'm not a physical person, so I'm not aggressive. Okay? Imagine Andrew is trying to answer this question. You apply the scale of aggressiveness to Andrew. Andrew thought this way, so he will report, no, I'm not aggressive. I'll give you 1 on a 7-point scale, with 1 indicating not aggressive at all. But turns out Andrew is a malicious person who, you know, likes spreading malicious rumors about others. So, by the definition that we just provided for aggression, which not only includes direct aggression but also indirect aggression, so by this criterion, Andrew is indeed aggressive. Okay, he is being indirectly aggressive, so he's still aggressive. So now you see the problem with this single item measure, right? It misses a very important aspect of aggression, and it will be very likely, in many cases, right, lead to misleading responses or observations, like in Andrew's case. Okay, so the single item measure, despite being face valid, right? We said that intuitively it is good measure, so it has face validity. But then we say that because of the reasoning here, right, it does not have content validity. It's not content valid. Okay, so then what will be the remedy to the situation? Well, very straightforward. We just include multiple items to our question and try to cover everything that we can think about or think of aggressiveness. So you can say, or you can ask, first of all, how often do you fight? That will cover the aspect of physical aggressiveness or physical aggression. And you can also ask, well, how often do you badmouth people? And that will cover the aspect of indirect aggression. Okay, so and then you can use the same scale, right? Never, always, right? To for people to choose from. So then this all these, right, will provide not only a face valid measure of aggressiveness, but also a content valid measure of aggressiveness, because it covers all known dimensions of the concept or construct we're interested in, aggressiveness. Okay, makes sense? Okay, good. So graphically then, right, we have a construct, and then it has multiple dimensions. Here we have 2 aspects, 2 dimensions, and then as a result, we need at least 2 items to cover both dimensions of the concept. And once we do that, right, when both dimensions are covered, when both dimensions are measured, then we have good content validity. Okay, pretty straightforward, huh? All right, lastly, we have predictive validity. So predictive validity is a very interesting question, because now to assess predictability, we need to bring in at least one other concept, one other variable, right? So previously, when we talk about face validity and content validity, we're just focusing on the target variable, right? We do not judge the content and face validity of the target variable based on some other criterion, based on some other variables. But that's not the case for judging predictability. When we judge or evaluate the predictability of a concept, we necessarily need to bring in a second variable. That is, and ask ourselves the question, can I use the measurement of my target variable to predict some other variable or other variables that the target variable is known to predict by theory? In other words, if we know, for example, right, if we know by theory, construct A, this is our target, concept, the concept that we like to measure, right? If we know that in theory, A should predict B, B will be our criterion, right? Will be our criterion variable. The variable that we use to help us evaluate the validity of our target concept. So if we know that variable A, our target variable, should predict variable B, our criterion variable, then if my measure, if my measure of variable A, if my measure of variable A is valid, in other words, if my measure, my scale indeed captures the essence of variable A, then it should predict a known measure of variable B. Measure A should predict measure B because A is related to B. And if the scale, the measure, whose validity we're trying to evaluate is indeed a good measure of variable A, then it should predict a measure that has been established to be a good measure of variable B. Okay, so this is the reasoning behind this question, the reasoning behind establishing predictive validity. Okay, let me take all these out. What's going on? Okay, almost there. Good. So let's, get concrete. For example, in theory, we know that if a person is aggressive, then we bet or we can expect that this person is very prone to anger. This person will be very easily angered. Okay, so that means, if our interest is on this variable, right, this will be our target variable. So in theory, then our target variable should predict proneness to anger. This will be our criterion variable. Okay, this is our target variable. This is our criterion variable. So it will follow the reasoning that we just specified. So if my measure of aggressiveness is valid, so this measure will be the measure we're trying to evaluate, right? Whose validity we're trying to evaluate. So if this target measure is valid, then you should predict proneness to anger, right? So this is the reasoning. So in this case, if we observe a good correlation between our measure of aggressiveness and a measure of proneness to anger, then we'll have high predictive validity. Right? A high correlation means, these two variables whose values would change at the same time to a very tight or high degree. Okay. So conceptually, this is the idea. First of all, we have our target variable, and we have our criterion variable. And then in theory, our target variable should predict our criterion variable. But then empirically, meaning in terms of observation, right? This is our theory. And we try to confirm this expectation using observations. So I devised a measure of aggressiveness, right? This measure is the one whose validity I try to evaluate. And then I have a second measure, the measure of proneness to anger, and this one is established, right? Meaning we know this is a good measure of proneness to anger, and our job is to evaluate whether or not this one is a good measure of aggressiveness. So our job then is to find out whether or not there's any correlation between our target measure, the measure we're trying to evaluate, and an established measure of the concept by theory should relate to our target variable. See, it's a circle, right? Circle of life. So we said that high correlation would then indicate good predictive validity. Or in other words, we'll say that, if we observe a high correlation here, we'll say that our measure of aggressiveness has, good predictability or is predictively valid. Okay? All right, so this lecture will be short. We'll save reliability for tomorrow. And this is due to our collective effort because, we have at least two pretty heavy lectures on, concepts and type of concepts and correlation, measurement yesterday and in the class last week. So after those two heavy loading classes, the class for today and the class for tomorrow will be relatively lighter. So, but that doesn't mean, right? The content is necessarily easier. I hope it's easy. I hope it's straightforward. But still, right? Please study very carefully the content of the lecture and let me know if you have any questions. So we'll continue tomorrow to finish up the lecture on reliability. And later today, I will be finishing up the study guide and post it to La Lima. So on Thursday of this week, I forgot what date is that. Let me check my phone. Right, Thursday. Thursday will be the 14th and Friday will be the 15th. So 14th will be our first Q&A session and 15th will be our first examination, right? So both events will take place in George Hall 213, right? George Hall 213. I believe the time is I think the time is 10:30. Let me confirm it, and then it should be in an email that I sent to you early on. Check the email, and I will double check the time and venue with scheduling office. But you should be able to find the time and place in an email that I sent you previously. Okay? All right, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you tomorrow.